The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated.
Welcome back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with my panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound, and we have a guest, Dr. Jared O. Bell, and today we will be answering listener emails, and we have a question from Art, who lives in Hornell, New York. I know where that is. And Art asks, there is a reported ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. The details are a little sketchy, and there seems to be some dispute over where Israel is expected to patrol the Gaza border. Yet, humanitarian aid is not getting where it needs to go, and a number of humanitarian organizations are calling for Israel to restore the flow of food and clean water as people in Gaza are dying of starvation. Does the panel think this is an Israeli strategy, or is the situation in Gaza so chaotic that humanitarian aid might not be easily distributed?
Yes.
What do you think?
Yes, across the board.
Yes, across the board? I know that people are being killed as they're seeking aid, and other people are dying of malnutrition.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what ceasefire we're talking about. I know the Israelis did agree to a ceasefire, but Hamas didn't like it, and so as far as I can tell, there is no ceasefire going on over there. Israel is continuing to do battle there to try to destroy Hamas. Hamas is still embedded very deeply into the infrastructure of Gaza, and they're going to continue to, Israel's going to continue to punish the Gaza Strip as long as Hamas is still there. And, it's a horrible, ugly, terrible situation. But, once again, I'm never going to be one of these people who sits here in America and tells Israel how to fight their wars, because
I have a question. Sorry, Scott, I interrupted you.
Yeah,
You're saying because how will Israel know with high confidence that Hamas is actually gone?
Yeah, I don't know when they and I wouldn't. By the way, I don't like and do not trust Bibi Netanyahu. But as far as I can tell, they have reason to believe that Hamas is still there. The hostages have not been released. There are still 50 hostages being held there. I believe that the Israelis also feel that Hamas is stealing the food that they're bringing in and giving it to their own people rather than allowing it to be distributed to the people of Gaza, and that the situation is continues to be as ugly as it gets. I don't know how they're going to know when it's over, but I imagine the hostages will be returned either alive or dead, and that would be one indication.
Yeah, I think, and I put this one in there from our mailbag because I actually had no idea. I thought maybe Scott had a little bit more insight into this one about the ceasefire. Everything I read so far over the past 7 days says that there is no ceasefire. There's still in negotiations. Yes, there seems to be some holdup as to where the negotiation says Israel should be keeping, where their side of the border is and things like that. I have seen that as well. I also have seen more directly that I think it was 100 different humanitarian groups have petitioned Israel, basically stating that Israel is withholding or slowing down the flow of the humanitarian aid, including clean water and food. There are reports of people in Gaza dying of starvation on a daily basis. But again, humanitarian groups have a tendency to look at the overall picture of aid isn't getting in. And then they aren't really good at figuring out who is responsible for that. I think probably Scott's got a very good point that this could be Hamas just taking the stuff. There could be a little bit of interference by Israel. Don't know. But the fact is that I really don't think that this ceasefire is where the listener has put it. I don't think it's in place as of right now. There is a humanitarian crisis. There's no doubt about that. But picking where the problem is, and yeah, I will say this: it's a very chaotic area. A conflict zone is a terribly chaotic area. And to your question, Brooklyn, my comment to that would be when Mossad says Hamas is gone, that's probably when we could start to believe it. Because we've said this before so many times on this podcast. If there is no better intelligence agency on the face of the earth than Mossad.
Who's in charge of Mossad? Does Netanyahu tell him what to do?
Yes, of course.
Well, of course.
Well, then if he's determined that he needs the war to continue so that he can stay in power, then what Mossad has to say is unreliable.
Well, this is true. And let's face it, October 7th wouldn't have happened if Mossad had done its job or had been, looking in the direction. And we've said this when it happened. How this got by the Israelis, this attack, how it got by them is unfathomable. It's sort of inconceivable, going back to The Princess Bride. It's just inconceivable that a country that has this type of spy network, intelligence network like Mossad could not have seen this coming. I mean, it's just amazing. Jared, what do you think?
So here's the bottom line, and I think this is what, while we can say that food aid may be, there can be a variety of things we can point to. I believe that this is definitely strategic. I mean, I definitely think Netanyahu and the slowing of aid into Gaza is strategic as a way to weaken Hamas and to so maybe that fact that starving people put more pressure on Hamas, and also a way to reshape the Gaza Strip, whatever the case is. I think this is a deliberate attempt, to starve whoever the case is. I asked the question, and people may have a different opinion, but when I did my research in Bosnia, I lived in Bosnia. I focused closely on the Bosnian genocide. My question would be to those who are saying, well, about food aid, what's the difference between Israel, whether it be whatever the case is, or however you want to blame it? By all accounts from aid organizations, Israel does control what aid goes in and out of Gaza Strip. So my question is then, what would be the difference, from what Bosnian Serbs did in the 90s to what's happening now in Gaza, right? And then everyone has their opinion on if this is deliberate, if it's not deliberate. My opinion, it's deliberate. And I think it's deliberate in a way to. I think there's a plan for ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip. There's no question about it. I mean, if you want to know how do you get rid of Hamas, you clear the entire Gaza Strip, because at the end of the day, how in the world do you how do you rid? I mean, look, we have PTs and conflict resolution, right? How do you rid the Gaza Strip of Hamas if there's just carnage and bloodshed and revenge and hostility, right? I mean, if you came and you regardless of the fact of you kill my infant, you kill my son, I want your blood, right? I don't care what the dynamic is, and then I want to join that group that's going to avenge my relatives and my family, right? So I do agree. I think it's a bloody conflict, and I think it's going to continue. But I think the larger question is, for Americans and people listening, like, well, how much do we want the United States to be involved in? How much do we want to, continue to do we consider ourselves having blood on our hands to continue to support Netanyahu? I don't trust Benjamin Netanyahu, and even this is something that Bill Clinton said not too long ago. Look, I think this war plays into Netanyahu's plans. I think Netanyahu would have probably gone to prison. So, kind of, staying in this position and power as this prime minister who's there to save the Israeli people from Hamas. No, I think there's a political rationale for Netanyahu for not wanting the war to end as well. And again, I don't I'm never against a state defending itself, right? Israel has that right. But on the other hand, when we've, and again, arguments have been made for the last 2 years. Under international law, it's clear that civilians aren't targets. Civilian infrastructure aren't targets. And there's no dereliction in the Geneva Conventions to that. It doesn't say if there's a hospital underneath. It doesn't say if there's a hospital with a supposed bunker underneath. That's not how it goes. Civilians are not targets in war. That's it. And what we've had isn't the case. The other side of international law is that the response to an attack has to be proportional. And I'm sorry, there's no way that the starvation and the conditions in Gaza and the continued bombardment of Gaza is in any way a measured response to what happened. And that's keeping in mind that there are still hostages that Hamas should release 100%.
When they do a hostage negotiation, have you ever noticed what the ratios are like between the prisoners that get the hostages that get released and the prisoners who get sent?
Yeah, there's always more Palestinian prisoners who are being released than hostages.
Right. I mean, we're talking about thousands of prisoners being released from Israeli prisons to free, in one case, one single soldier. And, we've seen recently hostages being released, 10 or 15 at a time for thousands of prisoners. The proportional swaps are not proportional. And 60,000 dead, from what we understand from the Gaza Health Ministry, would indicate that there is a horrible war going on, but that it is in no way proportional to the 2 million people who live there. There would be, if this was a genocide or even an ethnic cleansing, which it comes awfully close to because they are moving the population around as they see fit into a smaller and smaller area. But without the intent of a long goal towards, I don't think Israel is ever going to want to take Gaza back. So the motivation appears to be still to get at what's underneath Gaza, not what's on the surface there. And moving the people around protects the people more than it helps the soldiers. The soldier, if it was up to the Israeli Defense Force, they could carpet bomb the entire area and dig out what's left underneath. There was even a point in the war where they were talking about flooding all the tunnels, but they couldn't do it because, of course, the hostages are held under there as well, and they wanted to get the hostages out. So it's a complicated situation. I don't like the numbers, the proportionality of it doesn't say to me that that it's anything like what you saw, possibly in Srebrenica or other places where we've seen genocides. And it doesn't appear to be, I mean, I don't know what Bibi's, motivation is as far as keeping the war going. There's no reason on earth why they can't change out leadership during a war. But right now, the government is still controlled by a very small group of incredibly right-wing fanatical people who feel exactly the same way that you about Hamas and Gaza, as you just said the people of Gaza feel about Israel, right? I mean, right. Israel has turned hard right.
Sure.
Even leftists in Israel right now are on the right. And people may go out and protest and so on and so forth, but they want to feel secure. Bibi Netanyahu has achieved amazing things with the decimation of Hezbollah in Lebanon. What's going on in Syria is an open situation, but moving, it would seem, at least partially in the right direction. The recent thing with the Druze notwithstanding. And Iran is more or less taken off the table as a main, factor in the Middle East. it's at some point or another, the time is going to strike for the Saudis and the Israelis to get together in a deal that will somehow encompass a state for the Palestinians somewhere, right? Because the Saudis won't do it without it, and it would be up to Netanyahu to say yes to that deal, which he had done in September 2023, just before this attack occurred. So, in the end, nothing will be accomplished. Everything that could have happened in September 2023 will happen probably at some point, and this whole war and all the death and destruction that it has caused on both sides will have been for nothing. I guess.
No, I want to say, I agree with that final part, that hopefully in the end that this will all be for nothing. Look, as someone who predominantly has written about transitional justice and human rights, and to rebuff that, genocide isn't just about numbers. When you look at the genocide convention, it's also the psychological aspects that lead to destruction of a people. It's not just you're killing people. Listen, I'm personally, professionally, I would question the term, saying, okay, well, this is a genocide. But on the other hand, I would say, look, there have been mass atrocities that have been committed in Gaza, and that's the bottom line, right? And so I struggle because the world keeps saying no more, right? The world said the same thing, and the world came up with a bunch of rationale and excuses not to intervene in. Actually, the international community was complicit in the genocide in Bosnia, right? The UN peacekeepers handed Bosniaks over to be slaughtered. The UN, the world said the same thing after Rwanda. After the world sat by and watched thousands of Tutsis be massacred. And the world said the same thing after the Holocaust. And what's difficult for me when I log on to social media today and I see babies and children who are starving, like, I ask, like, where's humanity? Where's the question of asking never again? And this is military tactics aside, politics aside. And what's heartbreaking even further is, it seems like we're in a world that's upside down when we have sanctioned ICC judges. We have sanctioned the United States has sanctioned ICC judges who call into question, or the special repertoire for Palestine who's called into question Israel's actions and the actions of the United States. How do we move on in a world without accountability? Yeah, conflict happens, war happens, but slaughtering and mass atrocities of civilians, we shouldn't give anyone a pass on that. And this is what the basis of international law is, and says that, look, civilians are innocent, and babies shouldn't be starved, kids shouldn't be starved. And I'm on a soapbox, but when I see that, that's heartbreaking. And I remember doing my research and going to museums, and I remember seeing those concentration camps of starving people, starving Bosniaks. Or I remember being, I visited in 2016. I was teaching a class on genocide denial at the Catholic University of St. Paul, at the Catholic University of Lublin, named after Pope John Paul. And across the street is the Majdanek concentration camp. And when you visit the Majdanek concentration camp, there's footage of. I found Majdanek particularly haunting because the unlike Auschwitz, the ovens are still there, the gas chambers are still there. But you go and you see pictures of people who were starved at Majdanek, and how do we not make the same connection when there's a mass starvation in place? How does the world not say, oh, wait a minute, like, we've seen this before, we've done this before? And
I would say this, Jared, about that. The Jews in the Holocaust hadn't done anything to anybody. There was no action by Jews against the German people or the Polish people or anything like that. And that's not the case here. There was an attack on October 7th. 2023. That was a heinous attack, a existentially frightening attack to a country that is so small and yet holds half of the world's Jews. That when anti-Semites say things like "from the river to the sea," what they are talking about is genocide. And so if you're meeting genocide with violence, if you're meeting threats with this kind of violence, it is different than gathering up a bunch of teachers and bankers and lawyers and children and throwing them into concentration camps and gassing them. There's nothing like that going on here, and I continue to be haunted by the visuals of the kids who were taken from that concert that day and driven through the streets of Gaza, and the celebrations that were going on there, and the people running up and spitting on them or hitting them with sticks as they drove by, and 50 of those hostages are still being held there. This is a completely different situation than the non-combatant populations of Bosniaks or Jews in the Holocaust or Tutsis, etc. These are for the most part enemy combatants until they don't want to be anymore. And I do think that this is a different type of situation.
But so I think that's an interesting point, and I want to respond to that because let's look at pretext, right? What was Hitler's pretext for exterminating Jews, right? Jews were enemies of the people, right? We say now today that, hey, well, why in a world were thousands of innocent Jews slaughtered? But Jews were made to be criminals. Jews were the enemy, right? That was an enemy race, right? So, and I think I agree with you 100% in the sense that what happened is different in the context of Bosnia. But this the Bosnian genocide actually started long before. Genocide's in stages. There's 10 stages. The genocide in Bosnia started long before the actual massacring and murdering on October 7th, and just like in Nazi Germany as well, right? This kind of dehumanization of people. This kind of and I do agree with you, and it's different in the sense that Hamas committed an atrocity that is unforgivable, and they should be punished for. However, to take and blanket and say that everyone, women and children in Gaza deserve to be massacred for that. Women and children in Gaza don't deserve to be no more massacred than Jews deserve to be massacred under the Nazis, or Bosniaks deserve to be massacred for whatever. Bosnian Serbs labeled them as criminals as well, right? And you can go back and look through the Yugoslav news clips where Serb and Bosnian Serb leaders, painted Muslims as the enemy, and so we should murder them or whatever the case is. But I'm sorry, I have to disagree with you on that. And this isn't necessarily about a genocide, but these are mass atrocities that are happening in front of the world's eyes. And this is something I struggle with as a U.S. diplomat. The United States is facilitating this aspect, and our tax dollars are facilitating, the murdering of Palestinian women and children in mass. Again, what happened on October 7th was a tragedy, 100%, and it was horrible, and Hamas should pay the price for that.
Again, proportionality. Tell me how many thousands of Jews died on October 7th, and the proportionality to the populations, and how if you were releasing hostages, right, you would release thousands of Palestinians for one Jew, or a handful. And what we're seeing now is that kind of proportionality. There are 60, according to the Palestinians themselves, 60,000 dead. There would be hundreds of thousands of dead. And by the way, the Germans didn't kill thousands of Jews. They killed 6 million Jews. Right. The number staggers, your imagination. It's hard to even get your head around it. Nothing like that is going on here. There's a war going on, and it is a horrible war. It's not just there, but we see the war in Ukraine. We see wars around the world that are terrible. We saw ethnic cleansing just recently in I can't pronounce it, Nagorno.
Yeah.
Right. Azerbaijan. Sorry. I'm terrible at pronouncing these names. AB up there. Syrians killing off Druze, et cetera, et cetera. It's a horrible thing. Anybody killed, especially children, terrible thing. Innocent people getting in the way. Yes. If an innocent if a terrorist group uses an ambulance, the ambulance is fair game. Has to be. You can't allow them to travel from one place to another in an ambulance if they're transporting terrorists. That can't be part of the Geneva Convention. If somebody hadn't thought of it before, they better start thinking of it now. And I'm hoping that this thing ends as quickly as it possibly can. The best thing that could happen is for the good people of Gaza to take up arms against Hamas instead of against Israel, and rid themselves of this horrible group, this death cult that has run the place since 2006 when they voted them in. And they've sat there and witnessed people getting thrown off of the roofs of buildings because they wouldn't even spare a bullet to kill them, including homosexuals, including the other side of the Palestinian, Fatah, and nobody said anything about that. They were given tens of millions of dollars to build up a society there. They chose to dig tunnels and bring in weapons. They could have brought in X-ray machines, but they brought in bombs. They could have brought in food, but everything that got there was stripped and turned into war material. It is a unique and fascinating situation that scholars will look at for years. But right now, all we can do is witness it and hope it ends soon, and do what we can to make it end soon. But just saying to the Israelis, you got to put down your weapons, is not going to get that done.
So
because if the Israelis put down their weapons, Jared, that's the end of Israel.
No, I don't want Israel to put down their weapons. I want Israel to stop killing civilians. I want to stop seeing dead children in the news. I want to stop seeing the bombardments of a mosque, of Christian churches. That's what I want to see. Now, if Israel I struggle with this because both of you, Mark and you, made excellent points. The Israeli army is one of the most well-trained armies in the world. One of the most well-trained armies in the world, and so is Mossad. So I have a hard time believing in some way that there couldn't be tactical operations on the ground, that you have to bomb a church or an ambulance and kill innocent people. I'm sorry, I just can't fathom that this well-trained Israel story. The story from the Netanyahu government always changes, right? One nice points at Hamas is this kind of like these cavemen who use these rockets that just explode, and then now they're sophisticated with tunnels underground, right? So my response to that is Israel, with the support of the United States and their own technology, Israel is a highly capable military. Israeli police actually come, and Israeli army actually come and train U.S. police force around the country. I really struggle to believe that Israel cannot have tactical operations to rescue hostages and also B, eliminate Hamas without killing thousands of civilians. I'm sorry,
if there are 80,000,
there's something deeper that's there, and I would say that I think Netanyahu and the right-wing government, I think they want Gaza ethnically cleared. However they do it, they want to eliminate Gaza as a problem forever. Period. That's what I think.
I'm going to say, I've been taking actual notes on this. This has been fascinating. Here's my comment to a couple of things. Number one, Mossad, yes, I can say that they are very, very good at what they do. The Israeli military, and I've always said this, military is, when you use the military, it's a sledgehammer. It's not a scalpel. And even with our technology today, the military is a sledgehammer and not a scalpel. And, Jared, you brought up something very important, this idea of accountability. And I think it goes back one step before that. It comes down to a conversation like the one that you and Scott have been having is no longer acceptable in society. Because they're going to say, there's going to be half the population that's going to say, "Hey, Scott's got a great point. Jared, you're whatever," and the other half's going to say, "Jared, you got the great point," and Scott's a whatever. We can't even come to the ability in this society to be able to have these kinds of discussions without somebody throwing something at each other. How can you ask for accountability out of anybody if you can't even start the conversation? And here in the United States, we can't even start the conversation half the time. And, Scott brought up, how could, get the people of Gaza to throw out Hamas? They're bad people. They're horrible. I'm afraid that maybe the rest of the world's going to be saying that to the United States in a few years. How could you idiots have possibly elected these people? And look how bad things are for the world. So there's a lot of great things that come out of something like this. But I really do think accountability is huge. And I take it back to our situation here in the States. Accountability is big, but you've got to be able to speak up and ask for it first. If you can't speak up, and not be shot down or said you're a terrorist or you're a Looney Tune or you're this, that, or the other, then we can't even, we got to get past that step first. Now, my again, we all have the same PhD in conflict analysis and resolution. Mine was in analysis more than was anything else. Resolution, no, that's for somebody else, not me. I'll analyze it, I'll theorize about it, and I'll do all that stuff. But again, I do understand that if you're going to resolve something and you're going to get accountability, you got to be able to have the conversation. And this conversation, can you imagine this conversation being had anywhere else between any two different people? I mean, it just would not happen. But this is what gets accountability, because Scott's got great points. Jared, you've got great points. But somewhere in between is where accountability comes. Right in between both of these sides. This is where accountability comes. And to me, that's the great danger that we face here. Because somebody's going to say, Scott's a Zionist and you're anti-Israel, or Jared, you're anti-Israel. And that's not the case. That is not what anybody has said. They've generalized it, and then they classify it, because human beings, we love to classify things. We love to put things in little boxes which are easy for us to understand. And the fact is that this is not an easy question. It isn't an easy question at all. And but yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a strategy. I'm not sure. I'm not in the mind of Netanyahu, and like Scott, and you, Jared, I am not a fan of Netanyahu. I'm not a fan at all. I have said on this podcast before, I believe he wants to keep the war going because it's a distraction, and they're not going to kick his butt out as long as he's in the middle of a war. I think Trump also would like to see it continue because, again, it's a distraction. And, don't look behind the curtain. Wizard of Oz reference there. Don't look behind the curtain. Because if you do, you're going to see what's really going on. So, yeah, I mean, I hate seeing children. I hate seeing anybody die. I mean, that's all there is to it. I don't think there's anybody that says, gee, I really like, unless you're Jeffrey Dahmer, like to see people die. But the fact is that that's war. It's a horrible thing. It's supposed to be horrible. If it wasn't horrible, we'd do it all the time. But unfortunately, we seem to do it all the time. But it's supposed to be horrible. It's not supposed to be good. And I must disagree with one thing. The military, I get your point. Yep, we have all this technology. But the military's always been a sledgehammer. Always. But Mossad, I'm sorry, there's a scalpel. Should they be using Mossad more and that type of service more? I believe so. I believe they should. But whenever you bring out tanks are indiscriminate, no matter how much technology we got.
Yep, that's true.
I think we all agree with that.
All right.
I just want to add one part.
Sure, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think that you made an excellent point, and I agree with some of Scott's points, and we've lost this ability in this country to have a dialogue without. I'm not anti-Semitic. I've had close Jewish friends, people I've loved. I've written about the Holocaust. I've been to sites of memory of the Holocaust. I've been to Israel. I've been to Palestine. I've been to Ramallah. I've been to the West Bank. The bottom line is we have to get to a point in this country where we can disagree and not shut people down. And even on the smallest things, we disagree, and we have to give people room to do that. And when we don't do that, we get things like we have now, the political situation we have now in the United States, where people are enthralled by someone who says what he thinks, even if he's an idiot, or even though he's saying hateful things. But we have to be able to have dialogue and be able to discuss, so we learn and people grow. Well, wait a minute, like I see your point, Scott, I see my point, and we grow from that. But we're not having that in the United States, which is going to be the end of our society, in my opinion.
Yep, civil discourse.
Exactly.
It needs to make a huge comeback, along with critical and analytical thinking. All right, Brooke, I think we answered that one.
That's a wrap.
Yep. So I want to thank Art for the question, and thank you to all our listeners, and thank you to the panel. Thank you, everyone, for spending some time with us today. We encourage everyone to subscribe to the Nova Society on whatever your preferred platform is. Subscribing is free, and we really appreciate it. Do send us your questions and comments. We appreciate those. So for Scott, Mark, and me, and Dr. Bell at the Nova Society, thank you for listening. Stay safe, and we will see you next time on the Nova Society.
The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Apple iTunes, the largest source of podcasts and music on the internet, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your source for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. We'd also like to thank all of our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a question or comment, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So for Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power in society is knowledge. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next time. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, BH Conflict Resolution Services, a full-service dispute resolution firm offering expert, cost-effective mediation services to couples, groups, and businesses. BHCRS can be reached at www.bhcrs.com.